Good evening. Welcome to Washington National Cathedral and Hope Floats, a night of storytelling that will happen here in the nave. A very special welcome to those of you who are able to join us in person. We're so grateful to you for being here with us in one of the first times we've been able to welcome guests in so long. So thank you for being here. And to those of you who are watching online, we're so grateful that you're able to join us as well. And we are excited here at the cathedral to be able to open our virtual doors and our actual doors so that more and more people can be part of our programming. We're here tonight in part because of this extraordinary art exhibit by artist Michael Pendry Les Colombes, which is now available to view in person. So if you go to cathedral.org, you can find times to come and see these doves, which will be here throughout the summer. So with that, let me say that it is such an extraordinary delight on behalf of Dean Hollerith and the entire cathedral family to welcome Cara Foran and Pierce McManus, who have co-produced this extraordinary show of storytelling about hope. So they are the producers of a show called The Perfect Liars Club, a storytelling show with a side of shrewd, which will be back in person as things start to open up. So we're very excited to be able to get back into the real world and enjoy the kinds of shows that you all put on. I can tell you that I had the extraordinary opportunity on Sunday to hear just a few of the tales that you will hear tonight. They are heartwarming, they are hopeful, they are human, they are so much of what I don't know about you all, but what I've been hungry for over the last year that's fed my soul during the time that's been so difficult. One of the things that is true about this cathedral is that these stones soak up everything that happens in this place. And so I think tonight we're in for a treat as these stones soak up your laughter and maybe a little bit of heartbreak and some extraordinary tales about the human experience. So I'm going to turn it over to Cara, who will get us started with our storytelling.
All right, thank you so much, Michelle. We could not be happier to be here tonight. I mean, what a return to public life, right? Like, to go from being just home with my child and my dog in my house for 14 months to being here with all of you, it feels crazy, right? It's almost like we've all been underground for like 17 years, just in the dark, moving very slowly, eating whatever we can, and just waiting for that signal from the CDC to head toward that warm spring light and rip off our old skins and just scream for companionship all summer long. But it is pretty impressive, right? They come out of that long hibernation raring to go, and I think that many of us are ready to do the same thing, and I'm so happy for all of you that you get to do it with us because these stories are incredible. How many of you have been to a storytelling show before with Story District or The Moth? Okay, so lots of new faces, which always makes me happy. One thing you should know about the storytelling tradition, these are true stories. They're going to be told without notes, without props, without jokes, without rants. It's just someone here on stage telling you something really profound or funny or both about themselves and their lives. And your job as the audience, storytelling audiences are famously supportive and warm. So your job is to laugh really loudly in this space. We want to hear you. If you have to cry a little bit, that's okay too, because we've all got a lot of living to make up for after 17 years underground. And most importantly, clap big and loud and long. And why don't you do that while I welcome to the stage one of my best storytelling friends who taught me everything I know, Vijay Nathan. Come on up, Vij.
Well, that was lovely. Hey, how you guys doing? So, I'm just gonna rip the Band-Aid right off, so you might wanna strap in. Okay. On January 6th, I was watching my go-to news anchors, Savannah Guthrie and Chuck Todd, talking about the Capitol siege. and their voices were filled with astonishment and anger at this act of sedition and, and how very un-American this was. And I'm thinking, well, it's kind of on brand right now. I mean, we just had an election and 74 million people voted for Donald Trump. 74 million Americans voted for white supremacy. And that's 48% of the country. So as an American woman of color, 48% is not really great odds. That's like every other person I see wants me and anybody that looks like me detained, deported, or dead. 48%, think about it. I mean, if Delta had a crash rate of 48%, you would not fly Delta. If Hinge or Bumble had a 48% chance of setting you up with the next serial killer, you would not use either of those apps. If an iPhone had a 48% chance of sending nude selfies to your entire contact list, you would not get an iPhone. So 48% is a lot. Now, I have been struggling ever since George Floyd and Breonna Taylor on how to talk about race with everyone, but particularly with my white friends and coworkers. And it seemed like no matter how gently I approached the topic or how carefully I chose the words, every conversation felt like it was ending with a feeling of defensiveness and that they didn't really understand what I was saying and I didn't know what I was doing wrong. So magically, like I was on Facebook and I see this ad pop up, like somehow it heard me. And it was an ad for a webinar on how to talk to white people about race. And I was like, yeah, sign me up. So I sign up and I log on, and it was actually a webinar on how white women can talk to people of color about race. So I'm kind of not the right person for that, but I think, you know what, I'm gonna learn something. I will learn something from this. And then I see the first slide, and it says, how to combat implicit bias. 1, love yourself. 2, breathe. 3, hydrate. Was this like a freaking Lululemon yoga class on anti-bias and on, being an ally? It's like, I mean, they should have just like added a massage and a box of Pinot Grigio to this class. So that was a bust. I wasn't gonna learn anything from that. And so my friend Amy, she's a big podcast person. So she said, why don't you listen to podcasts on race? So I was doing my daily pandemic walks, listening to these podcasts on race, and I was learning about whiteness and blackness and the foundations of the racism in America. And I found out that, race was just a construct, and that race was about power. And I was just so mad as I was walking every day. And I was just so wangry. That's when you're so woke that you're angry. But I wasn't just wangry. I was also infuriated and wanxious and enraged and honestly a little wungry because I didn't pack a snack. And then I decided, you know what, let me call my black friends, because I had tried to avoid putting this on them, having them have to explain stuff to me. But I called them, and I'm not going to use their real name, so let's just say that I was talking to my friends, Michelle, Barack, and Little Nas, and I said, hey, did you know that race was a construct and that race was about power? And they were like, yeah, dummy. We've been saying that to you all this time. Welcome to the show. And I was so worked up about it, and they were just really chill, like, same stuff, different day. And all of them had the same type of story. They said that when they were young, their parents raised them to understand that they were not to trust white people and to be wary of them. So this was not news to them. But it was news to me. And I was like, why didn't my parents tell me about that? My parents are Indian. They grew up in a country that was taken over by British people. And they actually couldn't, they were taxed on salt. Do you know how bad Indian food is without salt? It's just curry powder. And my grandfather, my mother's father, he is a freedom fighter. He was a Gandhian poet. They literally sang the words that he wrote as they marched during the Salt March. And he was jailed for more than a year, then he was jailed again for his protest. And so I asked my mom, just like a few weeks ago, I asked her, I was like, well, did you grow up being, wary of British people? Or did you hate British people? And she said, no, I didn't hate British people. No, I hate the North Indians. They are so mean to the South Indians. Now, I love white people, I truly do. My partner is white. I met my partner, Jesse, in 2015. And then in about 2016, 2017, we moved in together, and then I became the stepmom to his 3 beautiful kids. And my race, I was never more acutely aware of my race until that moment when I was with them. First of all, these kids are beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed creatures, like they just stepped off the set of Sound of Music. And so one day I took the 2 girls, and at the time they were 11 and 4, and we went to the dollar store because, that's how I roll. And we went up to the cash register, and the cashier, a white man, looked at me, looked at the girls, and looked at me, and then looked at the girls again and said to them, "Is she your nanny?" And okay, perhaps it's not crazy to think that an Indian woman with 2 little white kids, but to say it, and to say it to the kids and not ask the adult that was with them, I said, because the girls were freaked out, and I said, actually, I'm their dad's girlfriend, and I left. But I wish I had been like, bitch, these are my kids. They're Indian albinos. Thanks for pouring salt on that wound. And now, just very recently, now my oldest, she is 16, and she's 5'9", and she's huge. She's just humongously tall and beautiful. And I'm just like a hobbit next to her. I always feel like she's my mom when we are together. But she called me, and she was actually at her mom's house. This was still when we were doing school from home. So she was at her mom's house, and her mom was at work, and she is calling me crying and panicked. And she's like, "Can you please come here and help me? The dog has escaped." And this is like a new dog that escaped. So I drive over, and I see her, I spot her, and I flag her down, and I'm talking to her. And then a white neighbor comes up, and he says, "Is that woman your friend?" Pointing at me, and I say, "I'm her stepmom." And he's immediately apologetic. So afterwards, I drive home. We find the dog. Don't worry, the dog has been found. And I drive home, and I'm talking to Jesse, to my partner, and I tell him what happened, and I said, I bet if I were white, I wouldn't be asked that question. I wouldn't always be asked that question. And he was cooking in the kitchen, stirring the pot, and he said, "Maybe. Or maybe he thought you were going to abduct her." And I'm like, she is 5'9". She is Gandalf. I am Bilbo. How am I going to abduct her? And she also has the freakish upper body strength of a German weightlifter. And I mean, like, she could just knock me out cold. And, you know, if I were trying to abduct her, wouldn't she be, like, crying for help instead of just calmly and happily chatting with me? And then at that point, I started to cry. And I said, do you realize that I always have to prove that I belong with you and the kids, and that you belong with me? And I'm just so tired. And I don't care if that neighbor was racist or not, but I need you to be able to see it, to be able to understand the possibility, to be able to see me. And he said, I'm sorry. When you talk about race or racism, I just immediately want to deny it because I don't want it to be true. And I understood what he was saying. I did, because I have done that my whole life. I was the person with another person of color. You remember Little Nas? He was talking to me about a coworker of ours, and it was clearly an issue around race. And I said, well, she's kind of a witch, but is she really racist? And now I feel like understanding implicit bias, it's hard, but it's like when you look at a 3D puzzle, and at first you don't see it, at first you can't see it, and the harder you look, some image starts to emerge, and then every time you look, you can't not see it. And that's what I feel like now, is that I see it everywhere, and I have wanted to close my eyes over this last year. I wanted to close my eyes on the way over here today. Well, that would have been really bad because I was driving, but... And it feels heavy, but it's a good thing, because as long as I can see it, I can do something to stop it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vijay. We're off to a great start. As I told you, this stories tonight are going to take you all over the map. Hope, humor, hilarity, heartbreak, and all the rest. And now I'd like to introduce you to our second storyteller of the night, Adam Ruben. Adam is a author and a television host and a scientist, and he's really funny, so clap it up.
So in 19, sorry. Is this actually on? It's not on. Well, that explains why no sound's coming out. There we go. Okay, thank you. So this is a true story about election fraud that I committed in 1988, when the world was paying attention to the contest between George H.W. Bush and Michael Dukakis. And to teach us about politics, my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Clavery, decided that we should have class elections. She came up with many different important offices you could run for: plant waterer, eraser clapper. Everyone wanted to be line leader. No one wanted to be board washer, which I feel like I have to explain to kids now. You see, boards didn't always used to be smart. We used to write on a hard piece of stone with a softer piece of stone. Not that long ago. And at the end, someone would have to wash the stone. So that's all to say that I don't know what idiot ran for board washer. I decided I was going to run for the office that was secretly the power behind the power. I was going to run for messenger. Now, the messenger's job was to take official communications from our classroom to the main office. Because as a kid, I guess if there's anything that appealed to me more than sucking up to the teacher, it was sucking up to the principal. Now, 4th grade is kind of the time when you're figuring out where you fall on the social ladder. I was pretty sure I was near the bottom, but I had hope that maybe I was misperceiving it. And luckily for kids, there isn't actually a way to quantify your popularity, except a class election. So I decided that I had to put my all into this election. I was going to give it everything I had to see if, on my best day, there was any way that I could win what was basically a popularity contest. Now, the way the election was going to work is that kids would give their speeches in the morning, and then after lunch, we'd have the old, head down on the desk, raise your hand, secret voting. And it was amazing. All these kids, no matter how cool and comfortable they were in real life, as I watched them preparing their speeches, I noticed they were all petrified of public speaking. Like they would just get up and give the same speech, every single one of them. Hi, my name is Ryan. I think you should vote for me for line leader because I do a good job. Thank you. And that was it. So I thought, all right, I may not have popularity, but I'm going to make up for it with showmanship. So I decided my speech was going to be a multimedia extravaganza. And it started with an audio cassette. I recorded this at home, I brought it in, and I put it in Mrs. Clavery's little tinny-sounding tape deck and hit play. I remember very well exactly what was on that tape. It started with a big fanfare on the piano, bum, ba-dum, bum, 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 except I couldn't play chords, so it was just like dink-a-dink-dink. And then I was introduced by my sister, who was 6, who said in her most convincing voice, "Look, here comes Adam Ruben, the world's best messenger." And this was followed by testimonials on the tape of people talking about what a great job I'd done as a messenger, which was just me doing a bunch of different voices. So I remember I did like the voice of a little kid. Adam bought me my teddy bear when I was thick. And I did the voice of a businessman. Adam brought me my important briefcase at work. And it went on like this for a long time. I remember sitting there with my finger on the play button, listening as I could hear kids giggling. I thought that was a good sign. I was wrong. So the tape ended, and it ended with a big fanfare on the piano, because that's how I thought you end something on a piano. And then I took out the props. I had these Hot Wheels cars, and I drove one of them in a straight line and said, if you vote for Adam Ruben, this is how the year's going to go. And then I took out the other Hot Wheel car, but if you vote for the competition, it's going to go like this. I mean, how could you argue with that logic? Who would you vote for? So basically, that was my attack ad. And then finally, I thought I would close my speech with a joke. Now, I was 9. I did not know how to write a joke. Here is actually what I came up with. At my house, I had found this bundle of unsharpened pencils, and I brought it in and I hid it under the stool where I was sitting to give the speech. And so I said at the end of my speech, in conclusion, vote for Adam Ruben. My messenger standards are figured with a sharp pencil. Then I took out one of the unsharpened pencils. Huh? I said a sharp pencil. I took out another unsharpened pencil. What? I kept going through the entire bundle of pencils. I think that's what I thought a joke was. You say something, but look, it's the opposite. So that all happened, and then we went to lunch. Now, at lunch, I had one other superpower in reserve, something that the other kids did not have. And that was, every day, as my dessert, I had the greatest lunchbox dessert that any kid could have in the late 80s. Some of you of a certain age may also remember Fun Fruits. They were the original gummy fruit snack. They were shaped like letters or numbers or animals, although I think in the mid-'80s, before they could do that, they're all just kind of like shaped like guinea pig poop. But it was the greatest dessert, and kids would buy them from me. They actually would say, like, I'll give you a dime for one, I'll give you a quarter for three. I remember a kid offered me $1 once for the entire packet, and I told him no, because that was a lot of money, but I knew there was something morally wrong about selling a dessert that my parents bought for me, you know, the whole thing. Well, on this day, a kid came up to me and he said, hey, if you give me one of your fun fruits, I'll vote for you. I'm like, oh. I mean, I didn't know the term election fraud, but I knew this was wrong. This was buying votes. But I also knew that this kid was probably not going to vote for me if I said no. And he would probably tell his friends not to vote for me. I had to do everything he wanted if I had any chance of winning. And hey, if I'm trying to use every asset I've got, the fun fruits are an asset. So I said, okay. But then another kid overheard and said, hey, if you give me one of your fun fruits, I'll vote for you also. I said, all right. And the next thing I knew, I had given away my entire dessert. The whole packet, one each to a different kid who promised to vote for me. And we got back to the classroom to get ready to vote, and I thought, oh my God, what have I done? I wanted to win, but not like this. I mean, if I did end up winning this election, would it be I who actually triumphed, or would it be corn syrup? So I'm thinking all these things as I have my head down on the desk. We're voting for all the different offices. We get to Messenger. I put my head down. Mrs. Clavery says, who votes for, and she named whoever my opponent was. I don't remember. I guess people put their hands up. Who votes for Adam Ruben? And I remember I put my hand up. That's all I could see. And then she said, okay, you can lift your heads. And there on the blackboard that some kid was going to have to wash were the totals. And I remember the exact numbers. 33 years later, I will never forget these numbers. Adam Ruben, my opponent was first. My opponent had 20 votes, 20. Adam Ruben, 4 votes, 4 votes. And let me tell you, there were more than 4 fruit snacks in that freaking packet. Mrs. Clavery went around the room after and asked us all to raise our hands and name something that we learned about politics. I remember I put my hand right up and I said, I learned you can't trust anybody. A few months later, we had another election, only for kids who had not held office the first time. And again, I was filled with hope because there was some way that maybe I could triumph. Maybe I could show that I was popular. And instead of being myself, all I had to do was be everybody else. So my speech was the same as everyone's. I got up, I said, hi, my name is Adam Ruben. I think you should vote for me for messenger because I do a good job. Thank you. I lost that election 22 votes to 2. And in the scientific experiment that was determining my popularity, I had an answer. It was nothing I could do. There was nothing I could control. My popularity was going to be some extrinsic thing that I had no influence over. It wasn't being me. It wasn't being someone else. It was just something about me. I think that's when I first lost hope that I was ever going to have friends. But there is a happy ending, because before the year ended, Mrs. Clavery decided to have one more election. And I changed my tactic again, because hope does not die. I did something completely different this time, and this time, I won. That's right. Adam Ruben, board washer. Because that is how the unpopular kid triumphs, right? It's not like they showed us on television. He doesn't put on sunglasses and suddenly become cool. He doesn't make an impassioned speech like in the last scene of Revenge of the Nerds and like change everyone's mind and suddenly they're all inclusive. No, he waits until everybody else has had a chance to occupy office, and then he runs for an unpopular position unopposed. But cleanest freaking blackboards ever. Thank you.
I would have voted for you, Adam. The video would have had me there, and I think you would have been a great messenger. So, yes. Please welcome to the stage now a member of the Cathedral congregation. She was also a children's librarian at St. Albans School, and we're so happy that she's going to share a story with us. Edie Ching. Come on up, Edie.
So like many of you, before the pandemic, I liked to travel. And every summer, for many years, I went to Japan with a friend, where we would do a little teaching in an English language school. One summer, we decided to convince our husbands, more reluctant travelers than we were, to come with us, and we would go by way of Cambodia to see the great temples at Angkor Wat. We made our reservations to tour the temples months ahead the way you had to, lucked out in terms of our plane reservations because there's only one flight to Cambodia a day, and agreed we would meet in San Francisco because they were coming from North Carolina, we were coming from DC. We'd go then by way of Seoul to Cambodia. The morning of our flight, we got to Dulles, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, only to find out that our flight had been canceled. Since this flight was all my idea, as my husband reminded me, I was the one to run to the United desk and throw myself on their mercy. "Oh, don't worry, Mrs. Ching," they said. "We'll get you to Seoul tonight." "But we're going on to Cambodia," I said. Not United's problem, because it was a different carrier. What to do? As we deliberated, it was announced that indeed our flight would leave in the next hour and a half. So we decided we would at least get to San Francisco and then try to negotiate something to save our trip. My husband slept for most of that flight, while I leaned forward, trying to push the plane faster and faster across the continent. Before we landed, a kind stewardess said, "Hey, Mrs. Ching, your flight to Seoul is still on the boards. If you hurry, you might make it." I hate to admit it, but we were those kind of people who raced off the plane before everyone else, making a flight, making a flight. We didn't knock anybody down. We raced through the terminal, we were a lot younger then, got on the bus to the international terminal, and as we were going up the escalator, we heard, "Mr. and Mrs. Ching, report to gate 35 for your flight to Seoul." At this point, we're past running. I am now shouting, "The Chings are coming! The Chings are coming!" I was not going to miss that flight. I wasn't loud enough. We got to the gate. It was empty, except for the gate agent, standing with his arms crossed, who said, "The gate is closed. You've missed this flight. We'll put you on something else later." I don't know what possessed me, but I turned from the gate agent to look out those great plate glass windows in the airport. And there I was, nose to nose with my plane. It was still sitting there. I could look in the window and see the pilot. So I did what any desperate passenger did. I decided to beg. I did not get on my knees. The pilot might not have seen me. But I put my hands in a prayerful position and acted like a supplicant. And lo and behold, the window on the pilot's side opened, and an arm came out, and a thumb went up. I was almost hysterical by now. Look, look, I said to the agent, the pilot, it's okay, it's okay. I looked again at the window because the agent did not seem to be responding, at which point the pilot had opened the window again and was now giving a calming gesture. To my husband's relief and the gate agent's relief, I calmed down. Shortly thereafter, we were allowed on the plane. After we were buckled in, the stewardess came over to ask if we needed anything, and I said, "What can I do for this pilot?" I knew the sandwiches I'd packed that morning were not much of a thank you. "Can I get him anything from duty free?" She checked with him and said, "All he'd like at the end of the flight is to meet you." And that's exactly what happened. When the flight landed, before anyone left the flight, too bad if they were making a connection, the pilot came back to our seats. I thanked him profusely, at which point he said, "Well, I'm kind of known at United for breaking the rules." I was very glad other people on the flight did not hear that. We went on to have a wonderful trip in Cambodia, very memorable. Believe it or not, our luggage made it. And perhaps even more miraculously, my husband continued to travel with me for many other trips. But that's not the end of my story. As Cara said, I used to be the librarian at St. Albans School, and I often gave chapel talks. And I decided that this experience was worth giving a chapel to the boys. It was well received, although I think they remembered the part about breaking the rules more than the part about kindness. But my story doesn't end there. A couple months later, the Washington Post put out a notice to subscribers that they were looking for stories about acts of kindness. And so one of the teachers suggested to me that I write about my airplane experience. I sent it to the Post, and they published it. My story still doesn't end there. Someone in Arlington, Virginia, who worked for an airplane magazine, read that story in the Post and contacted me and asked me if he could write it up and put it in a national airline magazine. And that's exactly what happened. My story does end here, but I hope for you, like these doves, it will fly up and stay with you as you think about the importance of kindness, sometimes over rules and regulations. And I hope you'll also remember the power of story. Thank you.
Fabulous.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'm gonna remember the kindness, I'm gonna remember the stories, but I'm also having really bad flashbacks to what it's like to travel, which I haven't done for a long time, and now maybe I'm gonna push it off a little bit more. But before I do that, please put your hands together for my friend Ritija Gupta. She's our next storyteller. She's told a lot of stories in a lot of places, but she's never told this story, and she's never told one here. So come on up.
It is so good to see your faces, everybody. I'm not the type of person who makes a scene in the Target. Nevertheless, about 4 years ago, I found myself shaking a virtual stranger in the wine aisle, yelling at him, "What's wrong with you?" His response, which was a statement, a plea, and a question, was, "I don't know what you want me to say. This is a first date." The reason I was shaking this man like a spy's martini in the Target was not because he had done anything wrong, but because I was afraid that I was going to like a guy who was going to break my heart. I had started con-marring my life before that was even a thing. Dating didn't bring me joy, so I'm going to toss it out. This guy isn't more interesting than Game of Thrones, so I'm going to toss him out. And these were not great guys. I'm talking guys who wouldn't cross the street on a date to meet me. I'm talking a guy who refused to brush his teeth because he didn't realize that an electric toothbrush still works even if it loses its charge. It's just a regular toothbrush at that point, just manual. So when I met a guy that I really liked, who was funny and smart and handsome, a guy that I immediately respected, I wanted to know what the stakes were. Because if this guy was going to waste my time, I wanted to minimize that time he was going to waste. But weirdly enough, he liked me back. And we went on a second date and a third date. And then he painted my condo and we went on a fourth date. And eventually, he decided he wanted to marry me. And what was odd for me was that I was 39 years old at this time, and I had basically made a judgment that I was going to trade the ability to date and maybe even have a family because I would rather have my self-respect. And self-respect meant that I couldn't just throw away my time on the wrong guy. And here was this guy who saw my value increasing every year, whereas at 39, I had found that so many other people didn't agree with me on that. Instead, he was almost like an appraiser or somebody on Antiques Roadshow who was like, you know, this spinster that you found in your garage would actually fetch over $2 million at auction. But the thing is that as we were planning our wedding, we knew that the question was going to be raised. When are you going to have kids? And we wondered that ourselves. My husband, Andrew, is 5 years younger than me, although he looks probably 10 or 15 years younger than me. And I just didn't want to go down this path that I had already con-married away. I knew that as long as I was holding out for the right person year after year, I was trading that self-respect and that right person for my fertility. So 3 days before my wedding, I went ahead and I just made an appointment with an OB for a preconception appointment. And as we sat down, I launched into why I believed I was infertile. And I went into, I waited a really long time. I put a lot of faith in my career, and I wanted to kind of get that going. And now I finally met the right guy, but I know it's too late. So if we can take some tests and you can tell me, definitively, and then maybe, Andrew and I will open up a bed and breakfast, even though I don't know how to cook or make beds. And he said, do you know what I think your actual problem is as you're looking at having a baby? And I said, no. He said, I think it's that you have no confidence in your body. In my pre-wedding assignments and tasks, I hadn't penciled in sobbing in front of a virtual stranger, but that's what I did for about 10 minutes, because this doctor had clocked me so quickly. I was afraid. I didn't have confidence in my body. For years and years, I had been told that I was wrong, that I was not dateable, that I wasn't going to find the person that was going to be my life partner. So I accepted that, and I figured that my plan B would be good enough. But now suddenly I have this doctor who's telling me that while I was thinking that I was making all of these trade-offs, plan A was actually still an option. Now you'd think that I would be really happy to hear this, but actually I was very upset. I was angry, in fact, because making peace with the plan B meant that I had skipped over a lot of pain. The stakes in my life weren't going to be that high. But suddenly, this person was telling me, okay, you think that you can't do this thing, but if you took a risk, if you walked through this door, there may be pain behind it, but there could also be the joy of having a baby. I wasn't sure I was ready for the pain. My husband and I were newlyweds, so whether or not we were really trying, we were just kind of enjoying each other's company, just keep it clean in the National Cathedral. So we weren't really worried one way or another. But a few months into our marriage, we had this weird sort of argument, and Andrew and I don't really argue. He had spent most of the day getting groceries and cooking for us. I had had some back pain, and he had spent about 2 hours rubbing my back. But for some reason, as I told him, I was just going, I feel like you don't love me enough. And he said, I don't know what that means. I'm still rubbing your back. So I went and I took an angry shower, and I cried in the shower because the acoustics are better in the shower if you're going to cry. And then the next morning, I didn't really know what to do, and my husband didn't really know what to do either. So he left the house, and he went to a store, and he bought a 3-pack of pregnancy tests. And after I laughed myself into an asthma attack, I took the pregnancy tests, and one after another, there was the news. I looked around at first to see if some other pregnant woman had come in and taken these tests. Like, am I being catfished by someone else's zygote? But no, these were my tests. My husband was very excited. I was not. I was excited, but I was upset too, because I'd gone through one obstacle, and now here I was. I'm going to be a mom. But I know what the statistics are. Again, I was 39, and I wasn't really looking forward to the danger, the appointments, the worry. But I threw myself into what I could control. I didn't really worry about putting faith in the process, because what good was that going to do me? All I could do was look at statistics and try to figure out, what my aches and pains were, and call the nurse line. I went through a couple of hospitalizations. And after each one, I just kept thinking, I have 7 more months of this. I have 6 more months of this. I don't know how I'm going to handle it. I didn't buy maternity clothes. I didn't plan a baby shower, because at every step I took there, it made this pregnancy more real. And the more real this pregnancy became, the greater the risk it felt to fall in love with this baby. And I had a hard time doing it. I finally went maternity clothing shopping, and while I was in the store, in the fitting room, I felt something move in my stomach. And if it had been a movement on my cheek, I would have described it as a caress. It was my baby caressing me from the inside. It felt like he was saying, Mom, I'm here. Be here with me. Week after week, I felt the caresses get stronger into elbows and into finally very, very strong kicks. And I decided that I had a choice, that somehow my husband had had hope in me and in us to have this baby. My doctor had hope in us to have a baby. My baby had hope in us that we could be his parents. And the choice I had to make was, am I going to mourn something every day that I have wanted for so long and didn't have the courage to say? Or am I going to rejoice in the everyday of this miracle? And I chose to rejoice. I almost didn't have a choice, because every time I would get broody or look at statistics, I'd get a kick. And he would kick really, really hard, and I would literally forget my thought. I started playing around a little bit with him. We tried playing classical music because we wanted to have a little nerd. He wasn't interested in classical music. What he really liked was classic rock. What he liked even more than classic rock was John Cena's walkout music for the WWE. I went through the pregnancy. My husband was so excited and super, super supportive. And the day that my baby was born, early in the morning as the sun was rising in June, I ended up having a C-section. In a ketamine haze, as my baby was taken out and started to cry, I sang Chicago's You're the Inspiration to Him, which is a song I can't sing even when I'm not undergoing surgery. But it's what I felt. Now that he was out and now that he was a full person, I felt that hope. I felt the hope for his future, and I decided I want to be a hopeful mom. I want to reflect the hope he gave me back to him. I see hope now in his curls, in the corners of his nurseries. I see it past the doves in the back where my husband is holding him and he's trying so hard to be good and quiet. I still occasionally get frustrated with Hope at the pain she asks me to endure in the promise of the happiness that I want. But I see her, even if I don't invite her in. I never ask her to leave. Thank you, guys.
Isn't storytelling great? Is that what you're all thinking? I know. We have 5 more amazing stories to go. Thank you. A true story about how great storytelling is. I knew our next teller, Ronald Young Jr., for like 2 years before we figured out that we work at the same company. We never talked about where we work. We only talked about story stuff. So please put your hands together one more time. Welcome Ronald Young Jr. to the stage.
So my father and I are very different people. He is tall, he is light-skinned, and quiet. I am average height, dark-skinned, and sometimes I don't know when to shut up. My dad is an Army veteran. He's the assistant pastor of my church. He is well-respected and liked by all of his peers, and I love making him proud. When he is proud of me, he does this little smile sometimes, or he'll do this like meaningful look, or he'll just chuckle a little bit, and it just makes me feel really good. In the rarest of occasions, he'll just look at me and he'll be like, "Boy, that's good." And it just makes me feel really good. I wanted to follow in his footsteps. So when I went to college, I joined ROTC, but the Army wasn't for me. So when I first received my call to ministry, I felt very happy because not only could I fulfill what I felt like was my spiritual purpose, but I was really gonna make my father very proud of me. I can imagine it now. On Sunday mornings, I'd be preaching and he'd be behind me being like, "Boy, that's good." And I just was so excited about this prospect. And I would have some authority at church, and my dad would look at me as his protege, and I would just go forward in his steps. It would be great. I'd be taking on the mantle. So with all of this in mind, I became an associate minister at my church, and my dad was very pleased. Now, we're Pentecostal. And those of you that don't know what being Pentecostal means, it means that we believe you have to repent, be baptized, and filled with the Holy Ghost. We are tongue talkers. We are snake handlers. Okay, we're not snake handlers. Like there's like some fringy elements that handle snakes. We don't handle snakes. I don't hang out with people that handle snakes. But we really do believe in the ritual of baptism. And now I'm sure that some of y'all in here have been baptized, and I'm sure that involved water. But with Pentecostal baptisms, it involves a lot of water. You are going down in the name of Jesus for the remission of your sins. You're going all the way down. You go underneath, you come back up. It's a very, very intense process for those that don't know anything about it. So I was very excited about the prospect of ministry and doing all of these things. However, I had been a minister for a few months, and it wasn't exactly what I expected. I was the youngest minister on the roster, and that means you don't get to preach on Sunday mornings. You don't really get to do the Sunday morning prayer. You're lucky if you get to do a scripture or two, max, that's it. So if anything, they give the youngest ministers the only job, they relegate us to teaching the children. And yes, I believe the children are the future, but I need that good, boy, I need that. So it wasn't exactly going the way I wanted until one Sunday when I came to church and my dad was like, "Hey boy, today you're doing baptisms." And I was like, "Okay, all right, put me in, coach, I got this." So I'm excited because I've watched my dad do dozens, if not hundreds of baptisms, okay? And it's a very easy process. We get into water again. These are Pentecostal baptisms. I know I'm in a rival church, but this is a very easy process. We get into the water, we bless the water. The missionary starts singing a song, "Take me to the water." The baptismal candidate walks down the stairs, and it's about a 15-foot a 15-foot pool at about 4 feet deep. So the baptismal candidate walks down the stairs. We walk them through the profession of faith, which is basically us making sure that no one coerced them into baptism. We have a lot of pushy grandparents in the Pentecostal faith, so we just got to be sure they want to be there on their own. So we walk them through that, and then I take them through the declaration, which is my dear brother or dear sister or dear non-gender conforming person. According to the profession of your faith, I now baptize you in the name of Jesus for the remission of sins, and you shall receive the gift of the Holy Ghost. And then you take them down in the name of Jesus, you bring them back up. And of course, before we do that, we cross their arms over their chest and have them hold their nose. That way they don't get water in there. It's gonna be cool. So I'm ready to go. I go to the back, I'm changing into the communal fishing waders that we use. Comes up to about here. We're ready to go into the water. My dad comes back and goes, oh, by the way, you're doing 3 baptisms. And I was like, oh, okay. I was ready to do 1. I don't know about 3, but I'm like, you know what, Ronald? You got this. Put me in, coach. I got this. So I get into the water. I bless the water. We're good. The baptismal candidate comes up the stairs. My dad's standing at the top of the stairs of the pool, and he's helping the candidates in and out of the pool. So the candidate comes down. It's a guy. He's about a little bit shorter than me, and maybe he's like real slight in build, narrow guy. I was like, no problem, I got this. I bring him in. I take him through the profession of faith. They're singing a song, take me to the water. I take him, turn him around, cross his arms over his chest. I take him, I do the declaration, I bring him down, right back up, success. He's done. I did my first one, we're good to go, or okay. All right, so I'm like, okay, I'm a professional baptizer now, I'm ready. Okay, so like, bring him on, it's all good. So he's leaving and the missionaries are singing, I've been down in Jesus' name. It's a whole thing, you guys gotta come check it out. So the next candidate comes up the stairs and I see immediately that she seems a little bit nervous. So I'm like, nah, it's cool. I'm a professional baptizer and I'm here to help. Come on down. So she comes down the stairs and she's a little bit taller and a little bit bigger than the last candidate. So I'm like, okay, no, it's all good. I got this, no problem. We good. So bring her down. We go through the profession of faith. And she's nervous the whole time. I could feel her shaking a little bit. I'm like, I make sure, hey, you sure you want to do this? You feel good? She's firm in her saying, like, yes, I want to do this. It's certain. I was like, okay. Cross her arms over her chest, hold her nose, like, okay, we're going to be okay. And as I was about to take her down, I did the declaration. I'm about to take her down. As I'm about to put her into the water, she flinches at the last possible second and uncovers her nose. So as I'm pushing this woman down into the water is going into her nose, and she panics. Her arms fly out, she's thrashing about, I'm pulling her back up, I pull her back up, I get her like settled in the water, and at that point she's like, she kicks out her foot, does this thrashing, there's waves going everywhere, I'm all wet, she's all wet, everything's bad right now. And I'm like, okay, I mean, I think that counts, so at this point, we take her to the side, we lead her up the stairs. I can't even bring myself to look at my father. The missionaries are singing a A minor key of been down in Jesus' name. And I'm like, it's all bad right now. So I'm looking down and I realize something's going on with the water, and the water is draining out of the pool because someone, I'm not gonna say who, someone has kicked out the drain to the pool. So we got to go light speed for the next one. We bring the baptismal candidate, bring him in there, do the profession of faith, go through the whole declaration, put him down, bring him back up. Success. Third one's good. I'm like, whoo, we are done. So at this point, I walk out of about 2 feet of water up out of the pool, and my dad takes the other candidate to the closet. I go to the bathroom to change back into my regular clothes. So I'm in there and I'm changing clothes, and I'm just reflecting on this. I'm just like, man, this couldn't have gone any worse. You know, it does count as 3 baptisms, but man, this is hard. And my dad walks in and he says, all right, son, you did a good job. And I look at him and he's smiling and he's proud. I can see it in his face. He's doing that smile that I know. And I look at him and I say, thanks. And he's quiet for a moment, as he sometimes is. And then he says, almost lost that second one, huh? Thank you.
I mean, you gotta have a church story if you have a storytelling show in the National Cathedral, right? Like that's, I hope you guys are reading your programs tonight. They have a lot of information about the other stuff our storytellers are up to when they're not up on this stage, and it's a lot of really, really cool stuff. So, but don't do that right now. Instead, put your hands together with me, and welcome to the stage my fellow Buckeye, Cody Pomerantz. Come on, Cody.
So my mom wanted 8 kids, and my dad wanted 0. So I'm the youngest of 6. There are 3 boys and 3 girls. It goes girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, in that order. My mom had the first 5 of us in 6 years. And we got along for the most part, except me and my brother Jory. He was 5 years older than me, and we shared a room, and he drove me crazy. We competed at all of the things Jewish kids compete at. Chess, ping pong, disappointing our mother. We shared a room, and he drove me insane because he acted like a classic older brother. I mean, he'd give me dead arms and swirlies. He'd put fake spiders in my bed and real spiders in my bed. And about once a week, he'd tell me that I had a smaller penis than him. That was his go-to line. But he was an expert fisherman, and I always took the bait. One time when I was 9 years old, he walked into the kitchen with a large sheet of paper. He said he had my Jason Kidd basketball poster, and he started tearing it up. So I went sprinting towards him, screaming and throwing punches, the best punch a 9-year-old could throw. It turned out he was just holding a blank piece of construction paper. When my mom ran in to stop the fight, Jory said he was working on a collage for art class, when I'd come in like a psychopath and started hitting him for no reason. He got off scot-free, and I was grounded, which did terrible things for my 9-year-old social life. Another time, I put a takeout container of pasta in the fridge, and I put a Post-it note on it that said, "This is Cody's." I came back a few hours later, the container was empty, the note had been scratched out, and below it said, "Thanks, Cody." But as much as I hated losing to him, I secretly looked up to him. Because unlike me, who was always paralyzed by anxiety and self-doubt, what you have to understand about my brother is that he could do anything. He biked across the country 100 miles a day, from Virginia Beach to Portland, Oregon. When he moved to Chicago, he decided to enter a stand-up comedy competition, and he won. When he moved to New York, he decided he wanted to become a professional chef. And in one taste test, he was hired by a billionaire inventor and a pro hockey player. When he was 15, he met one of the top-ranked chess players in the world, and he challenged him to a game, beat him, and then asked for his autograph. He won awards in poetry and fiction, photography and filmmaking. He could do everything. And then he got hit by a bus. It was spring of 2015, about 1 month before my college graduation. I was sitting in a history classroom listening to a white-haired professor drone on about the Salem witch trials, which is actually a pretty interesting topic, but it was pretty clear his was a first-hand account. My phone started buzzing on the table, and buzzing and buzzing, and it wouldn't stop. There's nothing quite like that feeling of dread when you know something terrible has happened, but you don't know the what or the who. The professor noticed and asked me to turn my phone off. Instead, I excused myself and I stepped outside. And that's when I saw all of the messages. It's really disorienting when you get in a group text and you don't know what you're looking at. But finally, I scrolled up and I saw the first message from my dad to my siblings, that Jory had been on the way to a phone repair shop to pick up his iPhone. He'd ridden his bike there, and he hadn't worn a helmet. So I bought the next train ticket, and I went to my dorm to pack a bag. And as I was crossing campus, I started crying, which was weird for me because I'd always seen people cry in public, but I had never done that. And it reminded me of this quote from this Jenny Ophil book that I love, where she says that the truth about getting older is learning that there is no one you can be sure you'll never become. Nothing you can be sure you will never experience. I think one of the reasons I was so upset was because with my other siblings, I could be sure that my last words to them were something like, I love you. With Jory, it could have been I love you, or it could have been screw you, I know you cheated, I want a rematch. I also started thinking about all the things that I had too much pride or too little courage to tell him. Like that he'd been the reason I'd gotten into comedy and writing and telling stories on stage to audiences like this one. And I just hoped I got the chance to tell him that when I got to New York. Meanwhile, I'd find out later that Jory was hit by a yellow school bus, which I think we can all agree is the funniest of buses you could get hit by if you had to choose. He landed on his butt first and then hit his head. If he had hit his head first, he'd be dead. And if he had landed an inch one way or another on the pavement, he'd be paralyzed. So in short, his butt saved his butt. And if surgery went well on his back, he'd be able to walk again. Jory was knocked out at the scene. And when he woke up in the ER, the nurses and doctors said, Jory, do you know where you are? And Jory looked around at all the machines and monitors and wires. And according to multiple accounts, the first words out of his mouth were, does my dick still work? And all of the doctors and nurses froze, and they said, we haven't checked. We're more worried about your broken back and collapsed lung and broken clavicles and broken ribs. And he said, that'll heal. And then he passed out again. Meanwhile, I was getting off the train at Penn Station. I took a cab to Bellevue ER. My mom and two of my sisters were in the waiting room. The nurse came out to give us a report. She said, Jory briefly woke up, but then he fell back asleep. And my mom said, well, did he say anything? To moms in that situation, the best answer is he asked for his mother. And the worst answer is he asked for his father. And somewhere in between is what Jory asked about. But when I first saw him, he was a mess. I mean, he had a gash across his forehead. He had cuts all over his arms and legs, wires coming out of everywhere. He was in a full back brace and had an oxygen mask on, and he was unconscious. And I think it was startling for me to see him that way because, to me, this was my big brother, a guy who had ridden a bike across the country and hiked mountains and surfed and bungee jumped, confined to a bed, unable to move. I think I would have given anything to him in that moment, just for him to wake up. I would have given him every NBA poster I had to rip apart if he wanted to. Finally, he woke up and he was still on a lot of morphine for those first few days. He was saying all kinds of weird stuff that didn't make any sense, like dragons love lettuce, and I can't feel my hair, and Donald Trump is going to be the next president. Like, weird stuff. So we talked, and I sat down next to him, and at one point he turned to me and he said, Cody, do you know what it's like to get hit by a school bus? And I said, no, Jory, I don't. And he said, well, let me tell you, it was a learning experience. There's a saying that comedy equals tragedy plus time, but no one ever specified how much time, and for Jory, it was under 5 hours. But it also didn't take long for people to flood the room who loved him. I mean, everybody visited him in the hospital. Neighbors, coworkers, girlfriends, ex-girlfriends, future girlfriends, everybody. He quickly became the most popular guy on the ward. There was a patient a few rooms down the hall who was deaf. So Jory asked my mom to bring him a sign language book, and he learned it in 2 days and started talking to the person. He casually chatted with other Spanish speakers. He taught people how to play chess. He gave cooking and diet tips. He was the Renaissance man of the ICU. But after all the visitors and well-wishers left, there was a moment when Jory couldn't hold it together anymore. It was just me and my family in the room, and it was clear that his armor of dark humor and boyish charm had worn off, and he started sobbing in his bed. And he said, "I just feel so lucky to be alive." He knew that he had come so close to death, and statistically, he should have died. So we all went over and we took turns giving him a hug, and I don't think I've ever felt more grateful than in that moment. And then, with tears still in his eyes, he said, I need to pee and I want to take a nap and get some rest. Could I have some privacy? So we all filed out of the room, and he said, "Cody, can you stay back a minute?" And that meant a lot to me, because this was my big brother who'd inspired me to do comedy and storytelling and writing, asking me to stay. And he motions me over, and he's still got some tears in his eyes. He grabs my hand in his real tight, and he says, "Thank you for staying. It helps me pee when there's someone in the room who has a smaller penis than I do." That's when I knew he would be okay. He got out of the hospital a month later, early, to come to my graduation. He wouldn't miss it. He was in a wheelchair at the time. He's out now, but he's still recovering from his injuries, even 6 years later. But now, every time I get off the phone with him, I make sure that my last words are something along the lines of, "I love you. I know you cheated. I want a rematch." Thank you.
All right. I think we all learned a lot there about Jory. We wish him well. Next up is Chelsea Short. Chelsea is one of my favorite performers to see in DC, and I'm super happy that they decided to do this show with us, so give them a big round of applause. Come on up.
Hi. Hey, how are you? Nice to see you. It's been so long. At 25, wow, I thought I was cool. Wow, I thought I was mature. And wow, I thought I was so much better prepared for life than all my peers. By that time, I had proven my proficiency in math and science and critical thinking and graduated with a degree in computer engineering. I had already had a job that paid me well. I had an apartment by myself, no roommates. Like any engineering nerd at 25, I finally got my first girlfriend, and she was pretty. And I was so comfortable and confident at my 401k salaried job that sometimes I would scroll through Facebook. And after we had been dating for maybe 4 or 5 months, one day I was at my job scrolling through Facebook when I read a post by my then girlfriend that on her bike ride to work that morning, she had been hit by a car. I know, weird, right? This is clearly like the hit by a vehicle story hour. I'm glad we were back to back. I immediately stepped out of my office and I called her. And after confirming that she was okay, I had to ask that awkward question, honey, how come you didn't tell me that you had gotten hit by a car? Because it's kind of an unspoken expectation that you communicate with your partner for support when something like that happens. Some people rely on their partners for things as small as, honey, you won't believe what happened to me at work today. And sometimes for things like, honey, you won't believe what happened to me at work today. So if something significant like being hit by a car happens to your significant other, you expect at least a text message. So through tears, she told me the reason that she hadn't called me to tell me that she had gotten hit by a car was because she didn't think that I was emotionally mature enough to support her in that moment. Now, because I don't want to seem emotionally immature, I won't compare the pain of being hit by a car to the pain of being told that you're emotionally immature. But it did hurt to hear that. Especially, it hurt and it surprised me because I worked so hard to know all the things that I didn't know about dating and about love. I was such a good student that I was so hurt that I never was invited as a teen to play Spin the Bottle or 7 Minutes in Heaven when I had gotten 100 A+s on all my sexual health class, like, tests and report cards. Like, I was clearly a great student. So I applied that same academic approach to my young adult life and romance. The problem is, there's a lot to learn about love that you can't learn in a book or in a class. A lot that you learn about love is through feel, through memory. And when I thought about it, when I finally decided to get some therapy, I realized I don't have any memories of my parents sitting together on the same piece of furniture. Yeah, they yelled when they were frustrated, but I never got to see them cuddle each other or say sweet nothings or cry on each other's shoulders when they needed support or encouragement. So I grew up with really no reference for how to support or love your partner or your teammates. So there I was at 25 with no real education in loving, but embarking on a journey of Black and brown queer trans love that was so much more intentional than even I knew how to be. Like, I don't know kind of how to explain it, but if the game of love were a video game, Black and brown queer and trans love is like the hardest level of that video game. Like, as if Mario can't jump and you get 60% of every coin, and your princess is never in any castle because of housing discrimination. But I must have been pretty cute, or my first girlfriend, my first love, was pretty patient, because over the months, she taught me and we learned together about how I could support her and how I could improve. I learned a lot from her, like how to focus on the fun, and how you can't buy yourself a gift for your girlfriend's birthday and then say it's for her. They don't fall for that. That was a tough lesson. I think it took me maybe 3 or 4 girlfriends to figure that one out. But things didn't end well between she and I. You can't learn everything in your first love. Towards the end of our relationship, a dark depression set in her. She was frustrated by her job. She wasn't feeling connected to her friends. Her housing was up in the air. School bills for a degree that she couldn't get hired to use were piling up. So I used all my critical thinking skills, and I was like, why don't you go back to school? Why don't you get a new job? Why don't you get new friends? Why don't you ever listen to me? And eventually we ran out of patience for one another. It took me a long time to get over that, but I did everything that I knew how to do. I tried to read all the blogs on getting over girlfriends. I tried to read all the books on getting over your first love. But what I found was that a lot of people don't really know how to either, and it's just usually not a lot of help. It was up to me to learn that hard lesson. After a lot of study and reflection, all I could do was commit to myself to be a better partner, and at least just don't make the same mistakes as last time. After the tears had dried a couple of months later, I happened to find a new someone that made me excited. And we loved to dance and laugh and go out to eat and eat great food. And she taught me some yoga. And that lasted for a couple of weeks as we got to know each other. But a deep depression had set in her as well. And all that yoga and all that good food hid it for a while. But one night I found us sitting on my couch together. And she was sharing with me how things just hadn't been working out for her in the last couple months. She didn't like her job. She didn't feel connected to her friends. Her housing was up in the air. And school payments for a degree that she couldn't get hired to use were piling up. But it wasn't just that. She was feeling the pressures of a world that counted her out all the time. As a half Mexican woman and a half indigenous and Caucasian woman, just the way the genes worked out, her older brother and her younger sister turned out a lot more Anglo-looking than she did. And she was so frustrated that she had all these markings of a Mexican woman and didn't feel connected to her Mexicanness. She didn't like her curves or her dark wavy hair, and she didn't like her Aztec nose, to the point where she covered up her nose with her t-shirt, and we had the rest of the conversation through the cotton. She didn't like that her nose made her look like she should speak Spanish. She didn't like that her nose made her look like the man that was in and out of her life, her father. So here was the test that I had studied for. Together on the couch, my partner seeking support, not solutions. Crying on my shoulder. Had all my study worked? So I started to speak to her about all the things that I hadn't learned in the books. What they teach you in the books about the Aztecs is that they had this incredible civilization, and then the Spanish came and the Aztecs disappeared. Where disappeared is a word that conquerors use when they don't want to admit genocide. And I spoke about how her nose, that Aztec nose, is such an incredible reminder that she gets to wake up and look at every day of the resilience of her people and the resilience that she has in herself. And that her Mexicanness was hers. It's right there in the middle of her face. It's how she breathed. And I can't say that a few words from a lover mended that deep depression or that deep wound, but it did get her to lower her t-shirt. And I felt like I'd passed the test. But the test of loving was every day after that too, where we got to eat great food and worship through yoga and learn how to love one another through nose kisses. Thank you.
Okay. Please, you're getting so good at this clapping. I like it. We got to keep the enthusiasm up for our final two storytellers. So please put your hands together for Casey Hunt. She's up very late because at 5:30 in the morning she hosts a show on NBC. So give her a lot of applause. She needs to stay awake while she tells this story. Come on up.
It is so wonderful to be speaking to people again. When I first came to Washington and I had my very first job in journalism, I was 19 years old. I was a scholarship kid at George Washington University. I had no car. I shared a criminally expensive dorm room with 3 other girls. It was tiny. And I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I had somehow stumbled in to this journalism job at NBC. It was an unpaid internship. I had very little money at this point in my life, and this job wasn't going to help with that at all. Getting there was miserable. I had to be there at 5 in the morning, and again, because I had no car and not a lot of extra money, I took the metro, which when you get on at Foggy Bottom and you change trains and you get off in Tenley Town, it really feels like you've really taken the metro or the train all the way to New Jersey at that hour of the day. But that's what I did every morning. And the reality was I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I had an office, a real office. It was really the only space I'd ever been able to call my own since leaving my childhood bedroom. And I didn't know it then, but it would be at least a decade before I had another office all to myself. And when I would walk in, I would bump into people like Willard Scott, who at the time was on the Today Show celebrating the Smuckers' 100th birthdays, and I was just in awe. And some of the correspondents who broke big stories about the Bill Clinton impeachment would store their lunch in my refrigerator because for some strange reason their offices were not as nice as my intern office. And I never knew what to say when they walked in the door and opened the refrigerator. It was so incredibly awkward. But I made some really wonderful friends, and in fact, the person that I worked for when I was starting out is somebody that I still work with to this very day, who still works at NBC News. And he started to help me figure out, okay, what did I want to do? The thing about Washington is that it pushes everyone. This is a very ambitious town, very ambitious place. It's very easy to feel left behind if you're not keeping up with everyone around you. And when you have an unpaid internship, you don't know what's going to happen next. You're always worried about the next thing. And for me, I was heading into a summer when there would be other students competing with me, coming from all over the country, from the fanciest schools, to try to find the fanciest internships. And frankly, I needed one that was going to give me a paycheck. I didn't have the luxury, like some others did, of spending the summer without paying my own rent. And so that meant that the pool of options that I had was even smaller than it might have been otherwise. So my coworker, my to this day coworker at the time, introduced me to a colleague of his. He had been a writer at a prestigious magazine here in town, beautiful offices down along the Potomac River. And he said, well, do you want to work in TV? Do you want to write? I said, I want to be a reporter. The thing that I want to do more than anything else is find out things that other people don't know and try to tell the world about them. Now, you can do that in a million ways, but in this case, this was an internship that was going to pay $500 a week. It was a fortune to me at the time. And I decided that I really, really wanted this because, the alternative, I could have found another job. I taught yoga on the side. I could have waited tables. There would have been a way to avoid going home to see my parents for the summer. But, I didn't really want to do that. I really wanted to take the time and take another step forward to figure out what was going to be next at the beginning of my life in the world. So luckily for me, I had made this connection, and I got the interview. And so I sat down in this office with, again, a beautiful view of the Potomac River to interview with the top editor at this prestigious magazine. And the interview went really well. It was a pretty old school, establishmentarian type of place, bit staid old Washington. But they did a lot of really good, solid, thoughtful work. And I was really excited about the opportunity to figure out how to learn from those people and to be in this place, and also, to get paid a little bit of money, which I had not yet been for any of this work. So I go into the internship. I'm very excited about it. I don't hear anything for a little while, for a few days. I keep going into my office. It didn't have any windows, but again, it had a door that I could shut. And eventually, a few weeks later, after this interview, I get a phone call. It's the editor on the other end of the line, and he says to me, Casey, we were really impressed with you. Your clips are strong. You clearly have a good sense for politics. We'd think you'd fit right in, but there's just one problem. The problem is that there's actually somebody else that I want ahead of you. It's a guy who he goes to Harvard. He's an editor at the Harvard Crimson, and unfortunately, he's really just our first choice for this role. We have to be pretty selective, and we'd really like to wait to hear from him to see if he's going to accept it before we offer the job to you. I said, okay, I don't really know what to do with that. It's not a yes, it's not a no. I don't go to Harvard. I didn't get into Harvard, in fact. They rejected me. But I thought to myself, okay, he's not slamming the door either. There's still a chance that maybe this is going to work out. So every Friday that month, it was April by this point, I called the editor back. I would sit down at my desk at 5 in the morning. I would do the work I had to do for my internship. I would wait for the clock to cross 9 a.m. so that someone else would be sitting at their office. I would pick up the phone and I would call him and I would say, sir, it's Casey Hunt. I still want that job. Any chance that you're willing to have a conversation about whether I might be the person that you want to hire for that job? And the first time I did this, he said, yeah, it's good to hear from you, but no, I'm so sorry. We still have not heard back from the gentleman from Harvard. So we can't offer you the position at this time. I said, okay. I hung up the phone. I went about my day. A few more weeks pass. Each Friday, I pick up the phone. I call the editor. I say the same thing. Really want this job. Really think I could do a great job for you. He says the same thing. I'm so sorry, but we still haven't heard from this other person. Please, stay in touch. Finally, it's getting late into the month. It's about to be May. I've got a couple more weeks of school. I really got to figure out if I'm going to stay, if I'm going to sublet my apartment, if I got to go home and live with my parents, if I got to get a job at the. I never worked as a waitress. It seemed impossibly difficult to balance all the plates. I really wasn't convinced that I would be able to do that. But I was going to have to figure that out if I needed to. So I finally made up my mind that, okay, I have to decide one way or the other. I can't keep going and being strung along. So I called the editor this one last Friday from this desk in my office. And I said, I really appreciate all the time that you've taken with me. I'm so sorry, but this is really, I have to make a decision one way or the other. I still would like to come and work for you. And he said, Casey, I'm sorry, I appreciate you calling again, but we still haven't heard from the guy from Harvard. And so, unfortunately, I really am not in a position to offer you this job. And I said, okay, well, thank you. Thank you for the time. And I hung up the phone. And I sat back, and I looked around my office, and I thought, this guy from Harvard? I've been calling once a week for a month. My whole life sort of, how everything is very dramatic when you're only 19 years old. My whole life is hanging on this one phone call. And this guy from Harvard, man, he doesn't even bother to call back at all. Man, that must be really nice, man. No pun intended. I remember thinking that I never would have felt that I had the kind of luxury that he did. But then I also realized, you know what? I can't dwell on this. I gotta put my head down. I gotta keep. I had work to do. There were things to do that day. I wasn't done yet. And a few minutes later, my phone rings. I almost didn't pick it up because I didn't really feel like talking to anyone. I don't know if you know how that feels. You get some bad news or things aren't going your way, and you're kind of like, I don't know who's on the other end of the line, but whoever it is, I don't really want to talk to them right now. But I answered the phone. This is Casey. And on the other end of the line, was the editor. And he said to me, Casey, I'm calling you back because the reality is, after more than a month, I've not heard anything from the guy from Harvard, but I keep hearing from you. And you have persevered, and you have shown me that you want this more than he does. Even if, I just told you 5 minutes ago that I still think he'd do a better job. You want it more. You're willing to do more. And so it's yours, if you want it. And I was a little taken aback. It had been a rapid turn of events. When I told my family the story later, they wondered, did I ever think about just saying, no, sorry, moving on, doing something else? But that's not what I said. I said, yes, of course, I would love to come and work for you. And it was the first time that I ever got paid to be a reporter, that I got paid to write the news. But in the end, it was not the last time that I got paid to write the news. And it wasn't that many years later that I walked back into the doors of the NBC News offices. You can, in fact, when you look at the skyline of DC, you see the Washington Monument, you see this beautiful National Cathedral that we're sitting in tonight, and you see the antennas that are atop what is the NBC4 Broadcasting Center, where for many years the NBC News Bureau was also housed. And now, when I walk in there, I see my own photo on the wall. And I look at the young desk assistants who are a little bit older than I was when I first came through the door. And I remind myself how much of a difference I could make for them, the way the people that helped me made for me, and also that the work that they put in, that people who come to me and say, I need help me figure this out, what can I do, how can I get better? Those people that are making the phone calls, that are reaching out to me, that are saying, I want this, to never forget that that is something so important. It is a lesson that, frankly, it has made me a better reporter. It is what differentiates great reporters from good ones. Do you make that phone call? Do you refuse to take no for an answer, no matter how many times you're turned away from the door? And it would not be until a decade after I accepted that internship that I got another office with a door. It was eventually Andrea Mitchell's old office at that very building. She had decided she wanted to move next door because it was a little bit bigger. So naturally, I ended up in the slightly smaller former office of Andrea Mitchell. And I sort of still can't believe that that's where I landed. But I have come back to this story so many times when I talk to others, but also in my own life. And as we have weathered this terribly difficult year, and as I look at these doves that are hanging from the ceiling, that it is so important that no matter what, if you keep the faith in yourself, if even in the face of no, 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 you tell yourself, I know that there is a reason why I should say yes, why everyone else should say yes, that there is reason to have hope. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for your attention tonight. We have one more story for you, and it's a doozy, so take a deep breath and put your hands together and welcome David Mayer Smith to the stage.
Good evening. I imagine if this is your first night out, you're feeling pretty tired, so I'll try not to keep you very long. I look at this work and I'm amazed. It's by its beauty, its simplicity, and its meaning. But I gotta tell you, as flocks of origami birds go, it's really only my second favorite. And it's in second place by a pretty wide margin. I'll explain that. To do that, I have to go back to 1945. We dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan, and started the nuclear age. 10 years later, a little girl named Sadeko Sasaki was diagnosed with leukemia. Remembering an ancient legend, Sadeko and her friends began to fold 1,000 origami cranes as an offering to the gods in exchange for a wish to live. In 1977, the book Sadeko and the 1,000 Paper Cranes was published, explaining that she didn't finish the 1,000 cranes and she didn't survive. And this was the book my 11-year-old son Cooper was reading in class when we had to tell him that I had been diagnosed with leukemia. You know, it was weird. I walked into an emergency room with a bloody nose that wouldn't stop. And 24 hours later, a doctor's telling me that I have this particularly nasty form of leukemia that usually comes on quickly, burns through your system quickly, and kills you quickly. He said they had a treatment, and that in 30 days, I would be dead or cured. Now, to be fair, he wasn't exactly that blunt, but I only have 7 minutes up here, so forgive me. The treatment was a chemical so toxic that it immediately reduced my lifespan. And that was followed up by an amuse-bouche, if you will, of daily arsenic treatments. That's right, arsenic. You may know it as rat poison. We didn't tell Cooper about that. We only told him that Daddy had leukemia. And he knew exactly what to do next. He started folding 1,000 origami cranes. He folded all day, every day. He folded in class, and when the teachers found out, they gave him more paper. He would fold from the time he got up in the morning to the time he went to bed at night. You see, my son Cooper is an artist in his soul. He's a maker, he's a creator in the best sense of that word, and so he did what artists do. He made art. I think that art at its best elevates us and inspires us. I think that in many ways, art can be a kind of secular prayer. And here's why I think that. I was in the hospital for 30 days. 30 days and 30 nights. And they were long, long nights. Nights when the voices in my head just would not shut up. I could go through the 5 stages of grief on an hourly basis. I began to question every decision I had ever made. Why hadn't I saved more money? I mean, we had excellent health insurance, but 30 days in the hospital is millions of dollars. The copays on that, and not being able to work for 12 months was going to wipe us out financially. And as a side effect, my now pre-existing condition would keep my wife from being able to negotiate with her employer with any leverage because they knew they had her. Would we lose our home? If I lived, could I go back to a job that could be physically demanding in a business that took me over 20 years to build? If I died, would my 5-year-old daughter even remember me? Christmas Eve, we had a little bit of normalcy. We had our annual Christmas viewing of It's a Wonderful Life right there in my hospital bed on a little 13-inch laptop on the table over my bed as the tubes pumped me full of saline and platelets and whatnot. And not long after that, in one of those nights that never seemed to end, I realized that I had something in common with George Bailey. We both had paid-up life insurance policies. We were both worth more dead than alive. If I died, we could keep our home and my family would have a pretty good life. So maybe me surviving all this was not the best case scenario for my family. This is the part of a story when generally I would say, "O Lord, why hast thou forsaken me? Haec credam adeo pio, adeo justo, adeo scito." So why am I still here? Well, I'll tell you. All around the ceiling of my hospital room, all the way, like it was warding off evil spirits, was a string of lights. And hanging from that string of lights was 1,000 origami cranes, folded by my son and hung there by my family. It was, for me, a perfect work of art, a work to inspire. Now, I'm not going to try and tell you that those origami cranes cured me. My cure came from a number of places. I am still here because of hundreds of people who I don't know and will never meet, who said yes to clinical trials that found my particular treatment for leukemia. I am still here because of the incredibly well-trained, incredibly professional, and deeply human nurses at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. And I'm still here because of an amazing oncologist named Dr. Allison Lauren. But I think any doctor worth their salt might tell you that a cure only works if the patient wants to live. And that's where the cranes came in. After 30 days of staring into the abyss, the cranes made me want to re-engage with life. They made me very selfishly want to live again. They made me hope. Hope that we could figure a way around our financial problems. Hope that I could see my daughter grow up and sing on Broadway. Hope to grow old with my wife. And hope to see what my son, the artist, comes up with next to educate and inspire. It's 11 years later now, and I still have hope. I don't know what life is without it. Looking at this flight of doves reminds me that there are people out there who are still looking for their miracle, who are still holding out for hope. So my hope is that if you need it, maybe this flight of doves can lead you there. Quick postscript. My 11-year-old artist is now a 22-year-old elementary art teacher. He teaches in all sorts of rooms in different buildings, and he told me yesterday that in every room he teaches in, he folds up a little origami crane and hides it in the room. That's worth living for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure to be in this space with you, with this art and all this joy and laughter and connectedness. I hope it's been as good for you as it has been for us. I want to welcome to the stage two people that helped us make this happen. My business partner and work husband, Pierce McManus. Woo. And my daughter, Avery, who stays out late on school nights so that mommy can do her thing. Huge thank you to Michelle and everyone at the Cathedral who engaged us to do this show. If you get a chance, come back and see the doves. They're here through the rest of the summer. They're even more gorgeous when the space is a little bit more empty and you can really take them in. And as things start to open up, follow us at Perfect Liars Club on all the social medias. We'll be doing shows around town, and have a great night. Thank you so much.